just to let everyone know, we are recording this event. So if you do miss out, or if anyone comes later, we'll be able to catch up on it. So a big welcome to everyone. My name is Isabelle. I help manage Haymarket HQ. Tonight's event is going to be all about DAOs, and joining us today, we've got two wonderful speakers from DeepDAO. I know that on the event run sheet, we did have Joni Pirovich speaking with us, but unfortunately her flight has been delayed, so I don't think she'll be joining us tonight, so apologies for that. Before we begin, just a very quick few words on Haymarket HQ. So as some of you may know, we are a co-working hub based in the middle of Chinatown. We do a lot of tech startup events, and more recently a lot of Web3 events. So you might have seen us at one of our meetups, one of our pitch nights. Today is just one of the panel sessions that we have online. So if anyone wants to know a little bit more about what we do, for example, whether it's co-working space or some of our virtual programs, I'd love to chat to you a little bit later. Now, I'm going to pass it off to Paul. Tonight, just before I do that, it's a little bit special tonight because from 6 till 7, we have our normal panel session. But from 7 onwards, if you like, there's an optional workshop all about DAOs as well that is going to be run by organized by BlockathonDAO. So I'm just going to pass it on to Paul to say a few quick words about that before we get started with the panel event. So Paul, off you go.
Sure, thanks Isabelle. My name is Paul Penendis and I'm a core contributor of BlockathonDAO with my other core contributor, Daniel Barr. And we run a public goods platform called BlockathonDAO, which is a learn to earn entrepreneurial education initiative to provide people joining the Web3 industry get experience and get paid for their ability to learn about the space. Specifically by participating in blockchain hackathons, which is basically cohort-run programs that run between 2 to 4 weeks. Currently, we're running a metaverse blockathon, which is basically happening right now, and also bounties, which is an ongoing process where people can do work, whether it be development or creative design. So, like Isabelle said, we'll be continuing with a workshop at the end of this workshop panel. So, look out for that.
Thank you for that. I'll just pass it on to Max now to begin the panel session. So Max, maybe you can do a quick intro and then we'll start the session.
Cool, sounds good. So my name's Max Parasol. I work at the RMIT Blockchain Innovation Hub, which is a very unique and special place in crypto research globally. So it was founded about 5 years ago by a couple of economists so we all work out of a business school, mainly around sort of tokenomics and that kind of research. And it sort of put RMIT, which is University of Melbourne, on the map. It's a pretty interesting place, and I've spent a lot of time over the last few months really digging into DAOs, what DAOs look like, what they are. The further I dig in, I often get confused, and I think it's a really good opportunity to hear from the guys at DeepDAO. Obviously, Joni Pirovich was supposed to be on the panel. She may still pop in at the end, but that may be unlikely depending on her flights. She said to blame the airline, but I won't say which airline it was. Part of that was because people in the community said to us, like, what is a DAO? How do we set up a DAO? The legal questions in Australia are obviously, like everywhere else around the world, quite confusing. So it was something that we felt would be a good offering for the community. Some of you may know more or less about DAOs, but I think it's a really good opportunity to hear what DeepDAO is, what they do, and what they can offer us in terms of understanding, what a DAO is. So on that, I might let Eyal first introduce himself, perhaps to introduce DeepDAO, and then give Noam the opportunity as well to introduce himself, and we can start from there.
Cool. So thanks, Max, and thanks, Isabelle, and thanks, Paul. Pleasure to be here in Australia and the Haymarket, the Blockathon event. I'm Eyal, I'm founder of DeepDAO, and a little bit about my journey here. I've been in software and product for some 20 years, both in the US and Israel, worked at Apple at some point, and I was also an activist, so I was involved in some communities had decentralized ambitions even before the word decentralization existed. Before Satoshi, if people remember still the time before that. And I saw from my own personal experience how good intentions to have everybody's voice heard and everybody's voice count, and to have people make decisions together and groups make decisions together, and even reach consensus agreements. All these good intentions always seemed to deteriorate, and power in the group fell into the hands of 2 or 3 people. I saw this dynamic happen time and again, and I knew that these people were my friends in many cases, so I knew the good intentions were correct. People really wanted to do what we call the flat movement, where everybody's voices are heard. And I myself wanted it, and I got into a position of power in a couple of the groups, and I saw the temptation of power is very strong, and you really are centralizing power even in my own hands. And I didn't want that. This was upsetting for me. So I stopped being an activist. And then in 2017, I started becoming interested in crypto. And in early 2018, I read the DAO frameworks white papers, like the first DAO frameworks that were around, DAO Stack, DAO House, Aragon. I still think these are masterpieces. I totally recommend everyone try to read the DAO Stack white paper. It's a beautiful document. And I was very inspired by it, and immediately felt that there's something there, there's a technology there that could potentially revolutionize the way people are working together and doing things together, and felt that this is what I was looking for. So I joined the first big DAO that was around, which was Genesis Alpha by DAO Stack, and started hanging out in Telegram. Then eventually there was a product, and I started voting and creating proposals and paying low gas fees because Ethereum was still low gas fee back then. And after a while, I really wanted to see what's going on inside the DAO. Who is voting with who's winning proposals, who's losing, what are the groups that are forming within the DAO? Because we know in politics, people, or in groups, people vote together with each other. They form coalitions. I really wanted to see that, to understand the transparent, to understand the power dynamics of the DAO. So I created a proposal in the DAO and got some play money, and developed the first POC for DeepDAO myself. And the community was very supportive, people loved it, they started adding DAOs and proposals, and here we are with DeepDAO a couple of years later.
Cool. So I'll let Noam jump in there and explain how you got involved in the process.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Noam. Well, I've been researching politics and governance, and also doing some of it for the last 20 or 25 years, including a PhD in political science on the organizational behavior. And yes, I first interacted with the future DeepDAO when I met Eyal in one of the activist initiatives he mentioned. And regardless of that, also I witnessed a lot of cases where governance and promises were different from each other. So I'm really interested in that type of research. And then you may appreciate how privileged I am to be studying DAO governance all day in DeepDAO. And we perceive governance in its widest sense. We won't get into that right now, but that's basically our core mission, to come up with governance, treasuries, and details that show us the whole organization.
So it's interesting you talk about governance and having a PhD in political science. You may not aware, you may or may not be aware, Australia just had an election on Sunday, and there's a different government now. But the previous government had what was known as the Bragg inquiry, which was basically colloquially the senator was Bragg, that's his last name, but it was looking at how crypto should be regulated in Australia. And it was quite forward thinking. You're probably aware of this, but one of the recommendations was to make a DAO a legal concept in Australia, so equivalent to a corporation or something like that. With a change of government now, we're not quite sure where that sits, but there was a lot of momentum and excitement around this in the crypto community towards the end of last year. But aside from that, and I think DeepDAO is worth mentioning, but we'll come back to that. DAO Stack is worth mentioning, we'll come back to that. But just in your opinions, both of you, Noam and Eyal, tell us what a DAO is, because I write a little bit for Telegraph, and I wrote a piece about DAOs a few months ago, and the first line in the article basically says they're not decentralized, they're not autonomous, and they're not organizations. So what are they exactly?
Okay, I can relate to that. I think a DAO is a group of people doing things together, and doing things together and managing assets together on the blockchain. So that's the particular aspect of a DAO on the blockchain. But really, I hear that people are asking, how are DAOs different than companies? And the first difference, for example, is DAOs are not companies. They are groups of people doing things together, and they can do anything at all. They can be activists or soccer fans or other things that are not companies. And so companies is obviously a very strong use case for DAOs, but some groups would not be companies. And then, there's since we have a little bit of a history there, the first generation of the platforms were what we call the purists. You had to have your governance on-chain, and you had to have the treasury on-chain, and you had to have automatic decision-making. So if the governance decides, something is executed automatically on the blockchain, which I think is great. It is a great innovation. What we see in the world today is that things have become a lot more modular, and some of the aspects of a DAO happen on-chain, and some of the aspects are happening off-chain. And we can get to that a little bit more later.
Noam, do you want to add anything to that in terms of your definition of a DAO? Not to put pressure on, but just tell us, because it's very mystifying to a lot of people.
Well, can always replace definition with the perception, and it becomes lighter. So I think we may also perceive of DAOs as some basic form of human communication on Web3, and this may not be a new thing, but to think about it this way. So maybe some of the expectations are not always relevant. So because DAOs have so many use cases, and as you mentioned, they are coming more and more. They are becoming closer and more integrated with real world, with physical assets, with actual governance over territories and stuff. So they are not a pure version of like the ideal of decentralization, but they're a tool to achieve that and a potential to achieve that.
Okay, so let me ask you both a slightly different question. A lot of people historically, if they're alive at the time, say, I remember where I was when the moon landing happened, right? I remember when man walked on the moon. So let me ask you your first impression of a DAO. When you first heard the concept, read the concept, and I think it's an interesting question because I remember the first time Daniel Barr actually explained it to me a couple of years ago, and I had no idea what he was talking about, and it just didn't resonate with me. So I'm just curious as to what was your first impression of a DAO, and how long did it take you to think this was a real concept?
Okay, so I was in a cafe in Tel Aviv, and I had heard about something, and then I clicked to read on my phone to read the DAO Stack white paper, and I cursed small letters, small PDF. The fact that PDFs have small letters and are difficult to read on a phone. But I did read it, and like I said, I completely it clicked immediately. I then went home, printed it, and started marking things for that. Actually, and Mark, I would also be interested in hearing what do you think a DAO is? Because if you already wrote about it in the first sentence, oh, it's not decentralized, it's not this and it's not that, but I'll put you on the spot as well here.
Yeah, so I write a fair bit for Cointelegraph. I usually write long form pieces for Cointelegraph magazine, and I generally just ask the questions. So actually, Matan Field from DAO Stack was in that article as well we were talking about. The real question that I had was, I believe DAOs work really well for certain use cases. Like for example, Ukraine DAO, which prior to that it was Constitution DAO. It was like everyone getting together around one really sort of shared mission. So I think if there's a really strong glue in the mission, and then there's tokenomics, obviously, that's a DAO for me, effectively. So that's kind of how I see it now, but it has to be from like a really strong mission. Otherwise, everyone's not on the same page.
Right.
And yeah, look, since then I've also written like quite a bit more about it, and we've proposed some DAOs around economic modelling as well, which I also think are plausible, to be honest. But Noam, do you have an answer to that question, your first impression of a DAO? And then we'll start to get into questions of how we actually would form a DAO and best practice and that kind of thing.
Sure. I was in a cafe in Tel Aviv, and it might have been the same cafe because I met Eyal there by accident. And then I told him what I was up to that time, which was studying a bit of data analysis, and he said, "Do you know what a DAO is?" And my own impression, he was like, "Oh, really, really, really," and it all went downhill from there, and I became an enthusiast right away, I think.
Cool. So let's carry on to the next question, which I think is important, which sort of, I touched upon. People love to say the Constitution DAO was an amazing concept at the time, but from your deep analytic research, you should probably explain DeepDAO as well, what it does and how it works. But what are the most successful examples of a DAO in your experiences for both of you?
Okay, so first of all, I want to start the process of induction, and to the question of how do you start a DAO is you sit in a cafe in Tel Aviv. This is definitely one good way to start doing your DAO journey. And but really, I would like to share my screen and show you in DeepDAO, because what is a successful DAO? There are many answers to that. So we can look at the data a little bit and try to understand from that. Is that okay, or you guys want to wait for that?
No, do it now, because I think, but first explain to everyone what DeepDAO is and how it can give some sort of data support for how DAOs are operating.
Okay, so let's let me just do that while I'm actually demonstrating it. So this is DeepDAO, and what we do is we aggregate data from the entire ecosystem. So you can see almost 5,000 DAOs on DeepDAO, and 1,070 of them are enriched by DeepDAO, meaning that some of these are loaded automatically, and others are researched by our teams, and we add information to it. Noam is actually doing a lot of that. And you can see that the current DAO ecosystem has $10.4 billion in its treasuries. Most people get confused a little bit between treasuries and market cap. So this is not the value of the total value of total market cap of tokens that are DAO tokens. This is the value of the treasury, the money that is actually being managed by the DAOs in DeepDAO. And this number was 2 years ago, it was close to nothing. 10 billion is like more than we imagined would happen 2 years ago, and the total was actually about 16 billion in December or January at the height of the bull market. You can also see that there are 1.7 million governance token holders. So these are the number of potential voters in a DAO. This is the number of people who actually voted on or created a proposal on the DAOs that are listed on DeepDAO. So 350K. It's an amazingly large number when you think about something that is so early stage. Now, what are successful DAOs? If you look at the treasury size, these are the top successful DAOs. Uniswap, Gnosis, BigDAO, and so on and so forth. You can see that the top 10, the top 20 is dominated by the large DeFi projects like Uniswap and Olympus DAO, but even here there are other use cases. So, but by treasuries, these are the most successful ones. If you look at the number of governance token holders, so these are the organizations that generate, the people buy their tokens the most. So Uniswap, Central, and Kusama, which is a substrate organization, and Compound and Aave and Synthetics, you can see again, DeFi is dominating the top. And number of active members, so this is interesting. ENS, which is an infrastructure project, has the largest number of people who actually voted on a proposal on ENS. One reason for that is that you had to vote on ENS to get the tokens airdropped to you. So they actually forced you to become part of their governance, which I think is cool. And if you look at the number of proposals, so PancakeSwap, Central, and Breskop, LexDAO, and so on and so forth. So there are many ways to measure what is a successful DAO. Is it treasury? Is it governance token holders? Is it proposals or votes? And I think this really depends on who are you and what are you looking for. If you're looking to invest in a DAO, then maybe you think treasury is the most important. If you are looking for investing in a strong governance, then maybe try to find which DAO has the most votes or the most proposals. And then if you dive deeper into it, for example here, you can try to understand how many active people are actually participating in the governance and what is the power dynamics within the DAO. So you can dive deeper into the data here. And here, for example, you can see the voting power of each member of the DAO. Like the top person has 7.4%, the number 10 person has 3.3%, the number 50 still has 0.4%. And you know, this was my initial passion. I really wanted to see what's going on inside and what are people doing with their power. So, for example, this person, the top voting holder person, has created 20 proposals, won 90% of them. So this guy is strong. Not only does he have power, he or she or entity, whatever that is, and not only do they have power, they are also using it and they're winning. And they voted 232 times and they won almost always. So if you're creating a proposal, yeah.
Let's break it down a little bit, because I get it. This is a data platform and it helps people to kind of understand the DAO and how it's working. And we can see here that it's not anonymous, it's pseudonymous. You can see the key numbers there, but you don't know who that person is necessarily.
Right.
Although people within the DAO probably do know who it is, and oftentimes they probably do know. So yeah. I can see, it seems to me, my next question was really around, we'll come back to the success question, because success is a complex metric. But around, you know, why you founded this project and why you thought it was an important project, because it seems to me it's something about transparency, but it also gives us a sense of how we should operate our DAOs and what's best practice for actually a successful DAO in terms of governance and the project, you know, moving forwards and developing, right?
Right. So yeah, I think the fact that when I started showing you all the data on this platform, you can actually see this data, and you're able to understand the organization in a much deeper sense than what is available on traditional organizations. You can see who are the shareholders, the top stakeholders. You can see their decisions word by word. What did they vote on and how did they vote on it? And understand the dynamics in there and the power dynamics. And I think this is really important, this transparency aspect. And I think Noam can talk a little bit more about transparency.
Right. So to complete on that, what we see when we come to list DAOs, so some of the DAOs we list are come from listing requests, and there are DAOs in different phases that approach us, and what you actually come to realize is that there are some, regardless of their matrix, there are some infrastructure or some basic structures that sometimes do not yet exist, such as tokenomics, or they are always very gradually evolving. So I think that rather than answering on the bottom line of a successful DAO, we can also talk about what would you like to go through when you establish a DAO, or what are the basics that need to be established for that, and then transparency. It's really there because all those structures, such as what is your governance system, how would you like your organization to be governed, by whom, or by what criteria, and also how would you like your token to be spread, like strategically. It all represents the later vivid organization. This is where it all begins, and the more it is, the clearer it is, and then when it's clear, it's also transparent, because this is Web3. So when you know how much you're staking for rewards, you can immediately sit on the contract implementation and so on. So I think this realizing the basics is one way to go when considering on success in DAOs.
Cool. So, like at this point, I had a bunch of questions around legal establishment for Joni, but clearly she may or may not make it. But let's keep this focused on the DAO structure. So, I was listening to something today around a DAO crypto venture capital fund, and they're basically saying how they only hire software developers now because of the nature of crypto and the way crypto operates. That for them to actually understand a project and to understand a deal, they really have to have a degree in computer science to be able to operate the fund, which is an interesting perspective. So I guess let's take this down back to the very basics of a DAO. What do you think are the basic elements to operate? And when you look at that metrics of some of the protocols and proposals, they would often be engineering proposals around how the thing should operate. So what are the basics? Let's say I want to start a DAO tomorrow. What are the basics that make it a DAO?
Okay, so I think you hit the nail, you hit it on the spot, Max, when you said you need a group of people with a mission. And this mission can be something like the Ukraine DAO, or real world assets, or it can be just a startup. Maybe you guys are 4 or 5 people and you think you'll do well fundraising in crypto, or you're passionate for Web3 for some reason. So any group of people with a mission is a legitimate use case for DAO and could benefit from a DAO. Now, which people should not start a DAO? Maybe if you're just 2 or 3 people and you haven't formalized your idea yet, maybe you should wait a little bit, because communicating, Noam touched on the fact that it's a form of communication between people. So 2 or 3 people can just communicate on Zoom or communicate in Telegram or in person. Maybe you don't need a DAO yet. If you're a larger group and you need to manage maybe 20, 50 people, then definitely I think you should consider a DAO. And how do you start it? You start it by communicating. So many DAOs that we see now are starting on Discord or starting on Discourse. And we're actually in DeepDAO developing a tool that would allow people to start a DAO right there on DeepDAO with their data and their actual information about themselves, and even even a brainstorming governance tool. So really, this is how you start. If you're just starting, if you're just early stage and you're just forming your idea. If you're already more advanced, then there are other ways to do that. We can touch on that in a minute.
Noam, anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, yeah, so you need, I think you should get some sense of what you need the DAO mechanism for, because it can influence which way to go. Do you need, there are different DAO launchers and different ways to program your own DAO contracts and different use cases, etc., etc. So you should know why you're establishing the DAO for once, and also I think have a sense of what is good governance. I mean, not in the formal way or academic way or something like that, but intuitively, what does this group of people see as the way they would like to manage their affairs together? This is what it boils down to. There are different ethics and different perceptions of freedom and of power and of self-capability and of wisdom of the crowd and what have you. So I think it's about the points of view and aligning points of view also in that respect, which is still pre-DAO, but part of forming a future DAO identity, which I think makes things easier or at least more efficient later.
So it's interesting. I think the number one reason why startups break apart is because the co-founders at some point have a fight, right? That they disagree on something, and ultimately, I think statistically that's the main reason why startups collapse. So, I mean, I don't know if this is a hard question because I understand the way you're both describing it. Everything's kind of bespoke. It's like every DAO is perhaps a bit different. But is there just on a basic level, a best practice for governance, for treasury? Are there some basic things that you think people should think about if they were to start a DAO?
This is a really interesting point. And I think people would work well together and people would fight with each other. We know that happens a lot. And one thing that is unique to a DAO is the fact that facts are being laid out and they're clear for everyone to see. I'll just give a quick anecdote from one group that I was part of. There was a list of voters, of people who are eligible to vote. And the list existed on an Excel spreadsheet on the laptop of one person, the secretary of the group. And then before an important vote, people wanted to see the list of voters and to speak with people. There were like over 200 people there. And mysteriously, the laptop got crashed 2 weeks before the vote, and nobody was able to see the list or get the list for 2 weeks. It was impossible to fix that crashed laptop. And then on the night of the vote, the list re-emerged with 40 names that nobody knew about. So the guy who controlled the list of voters won the elections, won that vote, and the movement went into one direction, and people were upset because they were duped, basically. So many people left, and the movement split. And so people would fight. But on a DAO, if you're managing your governance on-chain or even partly on-chain, off-chain solution like Snapshot, you would not be able to hide the list of voters. The list would be transparent. It would be there, and everybody would be able to see it and potentially approach the potential voters and speak with them. And so this is one way in which a DAO solves a real-world problem. You would still fight, but when fighting, you would not be able to cheat in one way. So I think this is one good example.
Yeah, so that sounds like pretty much a North Korean election there. I think I think Joni should be on the call now. So Joni, just if you're there, a little bit of background. We have sort of been discussing what is a DAO, trying to give the community a bit of a sense of that. Joni, are you there? Just confirming you are in fact there.
Yeah, I'm apologising for the background noise. I'm transiting through the airport on a delayed flight. Sorry, everyone.
No, that's all right. I'll just give you a brief introduction and I'll allow you to speak. I think just a bit of background, Joni is a bit of a legend of the crypto community in Australia, a lawyer who understands crypto and the law, and there's not that many people that get both. Part of the reason for this panel was because people asked us, or people asked the Haymarket community, how would we set up a DAO? How would we go about it? I explained to Eyal and Noam very briefly about the Bragg inquiry and the fact that Australia's just had an election on Sunday. But maybe you can just give us a bit of background about yourself, what you think a DAO is, and maybe some preliminary legal considerations as we kind of obviously flux a little bit.
Yeah, sure. And please, I can see comments coming through in the chat, so if it's ever too noisy, I'll try and go into a corner or something, but keep me posted. I think Bitcoin is the earliest example of a DAO and the best example. And gradually, as we've had other blockchains and other blockchain-based applications launched, and now we've got layer 2s, more and more infrastructure to support blockchain technology, people and groups have been either departing from the Bitcoin standard, and I know that's trademarked, but I sort of use it in the context of doing DAO first properly. And Ethereum was a key example of that, because we had a person, Vitalik Buterin, that was willing to identify himself and to lead a team predominantly through the Ethereum Foundation, which introduced a legal structure into the fundraising and launch of a blockchain, of the Ethereum blockchain. And then from Ethereum, we had more and more attempts at legal structures to attempt to deal with or not deal with regulatory obligations and quarantining legal liability or trying to be best managing any sort of tax exposure. And I just see more and more structures, legal structures, pouring in actually as more lawyers try to understand this space. And what they tend to forget is that this movement arose out of a desire for more freedom, that the law wasn't serving its purpose, and there needed to be this free space to develop what has been called rules as code, where you live and die by the source code and what it's programmed to do. And I don't believe in that necessarily. I think there's a middle ground where we try to live by the intent of code is law. I don't think that there should ever be code that is put into the world for the purpose of doing harm. It's supposed to introduce more and better utility and to democratize access to things that are traditionally sophisticated financial products or transparency of supply chain or pick your vertical. But apologies for sort of going on a tangent, but this discussion about what is a DAO goes beyond what can be reasonably defined in a soundbite, because they all exist on the spectrum, and I don't think any pocket of the economy or the way that we do business is safe from disruption from this now new business model of coordinating people and capital and ideas and values. And And so if I go back to Bitcoin where I started, the fact that we had a white paper launched by a pseudonymous author and that it has encouraged, or it's set a tokenomics model to encourage many, many miners around the world to invest in the technology, download the software, be part of the community on the forums to discuss how to maintain and upgrade the software or fork it where the community doesn't reach consensus or agree. That I think I keep going back to as the purest DAO structure that doesn't have any legals involved. So to bring it down to the Bragg inquiry, there are only 3 or 4 of us, I think, that included legal recognition of DAOs as a key thing that we needed to do, as a foundational policy exercise that needed to happen. Because if we didn't have Bitcoin as the earliest DAO, the Bitcoin network, and Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency, you know, where would all these decentralized, the digital currency exchanges have a pipeline of things to list? Where will they come from? You know, maybe centralized entities will issue tokens, but what's the fun in that? You know, they stop giving me governance rights. It's not necessarily giving me future utility. Maybe they will, maybe they'll come up with more models, but to be part of something that is a global community that the token represents, I think that that's worth being part of and protecting. And founders that are trying to launch DAO first are putting themselves under incredible legal and tax risk. And this really drives from, in the absence of a clear legal structure or a registered one, the people involved in launching it, in developing the code, in advising the developers and the founders, may all be considered members of a general law and or a tax law partnership. And the problem with that is joint and several liability. So if, Max, you're the only one that is doxed or identified as part of this initial team or the ongoing team, it doesn't matter that there was a team of 10. Joint and several liability means that any one regulator around the world or multiple can target you. And that's you being jointly and severally liable for all of the debts of the partnership. And so we haven't had a lot of enforcement actions yet. Only this year have some litigation actions commenced against those founders of the DAO or the key management personnel sort of operating a DAO. And that's the the letters confused, but the BZX protocol, and then there was one related to NFTs and that frog image. But the claim that is attempting to be made is they've only identified 1 or 2 people, and for all of the damages and the financial damages that a consumer or a number of consumers suffered, that particular person is the one that is being pursued. Not a broad claim against all of the members of the general partnership as broadly as it could have been construed, because that in itself is a jurisdictional nightmare. Trying to.
Can I jump in there, Joni? No, all good. I just want to just follow up and sort of clarify on that a little bit. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think part of the problem with the Bragg inquiry was this idea of having a legal DAO in Australia would be just sort of limited liability for the founders. So where
That's
are we
everyone.
at? Yeah, and where are we at now, and what does it look like? You know, if you had a client, for example, not to offer legal advice, but if they said to you, I want to set up a DAO in Australia, there's a question from Bobby saying, thanks Joni, are any DAOs being set up legally in Australia? Yes. If so, how is this being done? And what's sort of happening? Because just one idea I want to pick up on what you said was, and this probably goes with what Eyal and Noam have been saying, but DAOs are a spectrum, so they operate quite differently. And part of the problem with the Bragg inquiry, it seems to me, they didn't really have an idea of what a DAO actually is.
No, they didn't. And even though the inquiry went for over a year and a half, there's so many issues they were dealing with that they didn't have the scope to consider it properly. And so what ended up happening in Bragg's report was, I think they referred to it as a new type of corporate entity. And that is not what we've been advocating for. It's not for another imposition of director duties or director-like duties. The evolving models of governance of all of these different types of DAOs need flexibility for not just an initial model of governance, but many, many models of governance as the community evolves. And none of that will necessarily fit in the framework of existing directors' duties. So there was a mistaken, in my view, a mistaken reference that it's DAO as a newly recognised type of company. I don't want the word company used in the same sentence as a DAO. In my view, that would be a failure if we regulate DAOs as a new form of company.
So,
sorry, go ahead.
Agree with that.
yeah, I want to jump to Eyal and Noam in a second just to round it off. We've probably got about 10 minutes or so. There's one other question from the audience, but I mean, for me, yeah, it is an interesting one because I think with legal concepts, we tend to assimilate one concept with another. And when you think about a DAO, it can, I think even in my mind, be a proxy for another form of company. It's a different way to organize, right? People talk about it as a distributed workforce. It's a different way of organizing labor. And in our mind, we kind of just need to reconcile that with something we already know. So I guess there's a question from BlockathonDAO. Many DAOs currently have a legalist issue with many contributors not providing much value. How would you provide or how would you suggest Eyal, Noam, Joni, DAOs ensure productive outcomes towards a cohesive set of goals? I think that the legalist issue also comes back to the legal issues of limited liability as well when you have this sort of flat organization. So how do you see that playing out with a legalist kind of organization?
So the easiest way I can answer this is I think at 3 levels. Any core contributor to a DAO exposes them to that general partnership risk. And to limit their own liability, something they should consider with their own advisor is not being a core contributor in their own individual name, but doing it through their own company structure or a trust with a corporate trustee to get that limited liability blocker. And that's, again, putting in a legal structure because being a core contributor to a DAO right now, where DAOs aren't actually legally recognized and have that limited liability status, leaves a person exposed. Now, if they have comfort that their liability is blocked and they have a clear scope of service to deliver, a stipend or an amount that they're paid on delivery or upon milestones, then there shouldn't be other factors, despite a volatile and evolving regulatory environment, that stop their progress of contribution. So sometimes it goes back to the project to specify exactly what needs to be delivered and milestones and some variation around that. And that is messy and needs a lot more tooling to help work better. And that last mile problem of not just accepting what a core contributor contributes, but integrating it with the rest of the work packages, that is effectively a managerial and a supervision task. And I've seen some DAOs get approval to employ those managers and those supervisors for a project period or a quarter or for their salary a year in advance. Now the third level of that is when you start in substance looking like a full-time employee or even a part-time one. Australian employment law effectively sees any DAO employment arrangements as illegal because you have to have, you also have to designate whether the person is under an applicable award and pay the minimum salary. But the key requirement here is that the salary needs to be paid in Australian currency. And to pay someone in tokens is, on my reading of the law and some colleagues, actually illegal, even if the employee agrees to be paid in tokens. Now also there's the practical limitation that the ATO and superannuation funds don't accept the PAYG withholding for the superannuation component in tokens, and there's not enough infrastructure to convert those tokens into Australian currency easily because often DAOs can't get bank accounts to meet these basic obligations. So there's serious fines and sometimes criminal penalties, criminal consequences for directors or quasi-directors involved in perpetrating breaches of these rules, which again, we've seen no enforcement actions around this, and it's all of these things that we're managing, trying to manage very carefully, trying to have people as informed as possible, but all of these factors as they come to light could mean that a person who is initially enthusiastic now pulls back from their ongoing contribution to the DAO, which would be unfortunate as well.
So Joni, I just want to pull away a little bit from the legal issues at the moment. I see this clearly is very problematic, and probably if someone was to establish a DAO in Australia, they would need to consider the actual structure of it from a company law perspective as well as other considerations. But I just want to take it back to the general concept of a DAO as well, because obviously people in Australia may work for other DAOs or be part of other DAOs that are set up in other jurisdictions as well. Just coming back to that issue of the legalist issue, it's often said in the crypto community that DAOs are kind of a mechanism for efficiency in terms of working for the DAO and that kind of thing. Eyal and Noam, how do you see that playing out?
Just to touch on, I guess there's the questions that Blockathon team asked. So how do you incentivize, how do you get people to be more involved? And I think without scaring them of legal consequences, one way that exists in Web3 that didn't exist before is that you can incentivize them by offering them tokens, offering them some reward. And we're seeing in crypto and in DAOs ways that this can be done, like play to earn or learn to earn. There's the famous Steppen now, so move to earn. And these are ways to become involved in a DAO and actually make some money or participate in some form of economy. Whether it's good to make you money or not, I'm not sure, but it's a way to encourage people to do something and to potentially make money in that. So this is one way to invest, to incentivize participation and contribution. And regarding the leadership of the DAO, I think that again, you can in Web3 see who are the people who are creating more proposals and voting more, who are the people who are creating winning proposals and voting on the winning side of proposals, and who are the people that have the most voting power. So even if there's no official leader, if you're voting on 50% of the proposals or 70% of the proposals and you're winning 80% of your proposal, you're a leader of that DAO. And you're strong in this DAO. And I think that may or may not be a consideration in any legal understanding, but if I'm holding 10% of the voting power and I'm participating in a lot of proposals and winning them, then probably I'm a bigger leader of that DAO than someone who holds 0.002% voting power, just a few tokens, and voted once and lost. Then there is a difference between the level of involvement of different people, and the nice thing about DAOs, blockchain DAOs, is that you can actually see that and understand that in a very nuanced and granular way.
Just to tap into the efficiency and also question of participating, providing not always providing much value. So I was talking about governance incentives. I think also consider what is the scope of governance that is granted by the DAO rules. Is it significant? Is it interesting for people to govern? It's not just enough to let some let the community govern. So minor issues might be good, a great starter actually. But this is not something that would keep people in the governance realm for a long time, I suspect. And also, so what is the scope of governance, who can govern, what are the bars, and also, in my opinion, also participation and thick community ties are, that's what keeps any social organization going. So that's also an important aspect that's not always quantified. And one word about efficiency, eventually there's always attention to manage and some trade-off, at least imagined trade-off between participation and efficiency. So naturally there's no magic balance there, but if we looked into different types of DAOs, which we won't do now, there might be, different answers for different typical missions.
So that's great. We've got about a minute left. I guess final concluding words from Joni, Noam, and Eyal. There was a bunch of questions I still want to continue with along the lines of scalability and DAO stack and holographic consensus. So it was all getting a little bit too much. I think it's still a very abstract concept for all of us. What does 2022 look like for DAOs for each of you in a short word? Maybe start with Joni.
Sorry, couldn't go off mute. My hope is that we get in principle agreement from at least the Australian government that we get legal recognition of DAOs that meet minimum standards. That's legal recognition with minimum standards, not regulation. That would be my hope, but we're pushing a lot uphill to get that. But we're trying.
Cool. Noam, final words. DAOs for 2022. What's going to happen? Crystal ball.
The DAOs will keep expanding and tapping into the real world, more common scene. But regulation is a huge player here.
Eyal, to take us away.
Okay, so we started with 7 DAOs in DeepDAO 2 years ago. We went to 5,000 today. I'd like to see hundreds of thousands of DAOs. And I think this is happening. And how much would they manage really depends on the market. We started with less than 20 million managed by DAOs. We now have over 10 billion. Probably 100 billion is around the corner.
Yeah, and I think for those who are skeptical, including me at times, I think the money that's held in DAOs and the data that's held by DeepDAO gives a pretty good indication of the success of DAOs over the last year. So particularly the last 18 months, year, I guess. Thank you, everyone. Feel free to stick around for the workshop for BlockathonDAO. Otherwise, Toda Rabah, thank you, and I will catch you all on the flip side.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. See you later.
See you, Joni.
Thanks for joining us.